Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, once again, it's about horrible Karen bosses getting absolutely destroyed by employees. And OP tells the story about the time they obeyed the company owner's direct orders and it destroys her company. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So I used to work at a store that was open until 2 a.m. every night of the week. So as you can imagine, when 2 a.m. rolls around, I was ready to get out of there. Around 1:45, I would walk around and I would let each customer know individually that the store was closing in 15 minutes, and I would ask them if they need help finding anything before then. I did this for about 4 months working there, and I never had a problem, other than the occasional super rude customer who would completely ignore me and keep shopping until like 2:30 or 3 or whatever. Usually, I was alone by 1:45, since business really slows down. But one night, my manager was still there. When she saw me go and tell customers the store was closing in 15 minutes, she was pissed. She told me that I could never tell a customer the store was closing. She said it was incredibly rude and put way too much pressure on them. With that said, fast forward to a few weeks later. I've still been giving customers a 15 minutes heads up, because frankly, I don't think it's rude to tell someone your store is about to close, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning. And here's where I see my opportunity. A woman came in around 1 a.m. She seemed pretty out of it, and she was wandering around the store aimlessly the whole time. She would bring something to the counter, ask me to hold it, and then come back and ask me to put it back because she changed her mind. I had the feeling that she could spend all night wandering the store, so I decided that this would be the one customer I wouldn't warn about closing. So 2 a.m. rolls around and I say absolutely nothing, and I proceed to say nothing all the way until 4:45 a.m. when she finally leaves the store. I literally get a call at 8 a.m. the next day from my manager, furious that I closed the store at almost 5 a.m. I innocently told her that the woman was still busy shopping the whole time, and I remind her that it's extremely rude to tell a customer the store's closed. The next night, when I went in for my shift, they made the 15-minute warning a universal rule. We were all supposed to warn customers the store was closing. Plus, we were supposed to turn people away if they showed up after 2 a.m. Afterwards, I admitted to my other coworkers that I had done it intentionally to show the management how dumb their decision was. And I'm glad I did it because we never had to let another drunk teenager into the store after 2 a.m. again. With that said, I'm pretty sure the manager was just power tripping, looking to boss OP around because, you know, some bosses are a-holes like that. About 9 years ago, I worked at a fast food place. The job was absolutely horrible as I got written up for anything and everything I did. If I took my breaks, right up. If I didn't take my breaks, right up. I even called out once with a doctor's note saying I absolutely could not work, as my illness was highly contagious and I got a write-up. Any excuse that my stupid supervisor could find to write me up, he did. And being in high school at the time, I took this very personally, and I assumed I had done something wrong. I worked there for 2 years, taking each write-up as a, quote, learning opportunity. However, I finally reached a point where I recognized it wasn't my fault, and the malicious compliance began. So in this job, there were add-ons you could get with your meal, and these add-ons came with an upcharge. Of course, with stupid little add-ons like $3 for a small scoop of avocado, I had customers complain to me constantly about not wanting to be charged extra and how ridiculous it was. But normally, they would pay and move on. One customer, however, a Karen, refused to pay for the add-on, but she wanted it anyway. I just pointed to the sign that said it would cost extra, and tried my best to politely explain to her that I can't give it to her without charging her. At that, she demands to speak to my manager, so I happily call the manager over, who I'll call Bob. Now, I thought that surely Bob would have my back, right? As he knows the most about the rules I had to follow, and giving customers things for free would be a no-no. I was very, very wrong. So after listening to the customer, Bob proceeds to yell at me right in front of her, stating the customer is always right, and you are not paid to argue with her. Give her what she wants and do not charge her for any of it. He then looked at Karen, who was smiling smugly, and he informed her that I would be written up for this, and I was. I of course was angry, and I was super embarrassed that he would do that to me in front of someone. So from that moment on, whenever a customer complained about having to pay for an add-on, I did not charge them for it. Also, if a customer demanded items for free, stating they didn't like their meal or had a bad experience, I would also give that to them for free. After all, the customer says they shouldn't have to pay for it, so who was I to argue? And I don't want to get yelled at again. Now, it didn't take long for the customers who complained to catch on, and word of mouth got around to their friends and family. Since each add-on cost 60 cents or more, and most customers wanted more than one add-on, the company was losing an average of $2 to $3 per transaction on add-ons alone. And that's not even considering the customers who got the entire order for free if they complained hard enough. Of course, $2 to $3 doesn't seem like much, but it was enough to catch the attention of my district supervisor, who I'll call Anne. She first asked Bob why our location appeared to be less profitable than other locations, and why our location was making less money than it had been a few months previously. Bob, being the crap manager he was, tried to pin it on me, saying that I was stealing from the company by giving my friends and coworkers free items all the time. Anne, understanding how serious of an accusation that was, insisted on speaking with me alone. I expected to be fired, but she had a serious talk with me about giving food away for free, and that's when I explained to her what Bob told me. And I let everything out. I told her how he yelled at me in front of customers, saying the customer is always right and to give them what they want. I said I didn't want to be written up again, so I followed his instructions word for word. And let me tell you, for the first time since starting this job, someone actually took my side. She agreed that not charging for those add-ons would explain the loss she was seeing, and how Bob handled the situation was extremely unprofessional and entirely against policy. Having Bob accuse me of stealing to protect himself was my last straw, and I put in my 2 weeks notice the same day. Shortly after my last shift there, I was informed by my friends who still work there that Bob no longer worked there as well. It's no surprise that Anne was so upset with him that she launched an investigation into his behavior. As it turns out, I was not the only one he would write up without a legitimate reason. They were also incredibly upset that he directly caused an unnecessary loss in profits. And the thing is, he couldn't blame me for it, as it was his words. And many people corroborated that he had said the exact same thing to them at one point or another. I was just the first to maliciously comply with his request, thus bringing his behavior to the attention of someone in a higher position than him. He was fired effective immediately. Good frickin' riddance. Again, guys, I've said this so many times, like how people like Bob get into management positions is beyond me. Like, it's common sense that being in the food industry, you very quickly learn the customer is not always right. Like, you can't just give away things for free to unreasonable customers, and especially don't berate employees in front of Karen customers. Like, that's the absolute worst thing a manager can do, is to give Karens more power by yelling at employees in front of them. In my opinion, Bob should have been fired a long time ago for being such a garbage boss, and I'm so glad that OP's the one who destroys him. And this person comments, "The customer is always right" is not the full quote. It's "the customer is always right in matters of taste," meaning that if the customer wants to buy a butt-ugly sweater, they must be allowed to do so. So this happened 20 years ago, after I turned 18 and during my first adult job as a cook. I worked in a franchise that had a very creepy clown as a mascot. After working there for 6 months, I decided that I preferred to work as a bartender. So it was known that I was trying to find some other job in a bar. This is a bit relevant with what happened. So I was supposed to clock out at 4 p.m. As soon as my shift ended, I punched my card and I was on my way to change clothes so I can leave. As I was leaving the kitchen, a big group of customers, like 10 to 12 people, walk in the store. So one of my managers demanded I stay to help. Now I want to note that she did not ask if I can help. She demanded I stay and help, even though I'd already clocked out. Being 18 years old and nice, I agreed to stay to help. Around 20 minutes later, I was still in the kitchen with several orders still to do. So I was complaining to the second manager, who's also working the kitchen at the time, that I really needed to go. For some reason, the other manager, the one that demanded I stay to help, overheard my complaint, and she starts yelling at me that I'm useless and that I should be grateful that I have a job, and that I shouldn't say these things as she knows I'm searching for another job, and that she could fire me on the spot anytime she wants. Mind you, she wasn't working the kitchen, she had just entered the kitchen to grab some stuff. So I told her that I'd already finished my shift and I wasn't getting paid for the extra time I was there, and that I was already late for the plans I had. That's when she yells to me and says, "If you want to leave now, you might as well quit. We don't need you." So cue the malicious compliance. I followed her instruction to the letter. I told her, yes, I want to leave now, so I quit. I then took off my shirt and pants as they were company issued, and I went to pick up my stuff wearing only my underwear. Even after picking up my clothes, I didn't bother to get dressed, I just walked out the front door in my underwear. My shoes were also mine, so I wasn't barefoot. I walked to my car where I put the rest of my clothes on. This happened in full view of the customers, as the kitchen is in direct view from the whole store. She was dumbfounded, and some customers even told me good job, because they had heard how nasty she was being with me. Later, I found out that she was reprimanded by the owner, probably because everything happened in full view of customers, and I even got a small bonus on my last paycheck. Within the next couple of weeks, I found a bartending job that I kept for a few years. So in the end, everything worked out for the best. Oh man guys, what OP did that day, some people only dream about doing. Like, there's nothing worse than having a boss that basically thinks that they own you. So the fact that OP quit on the spot and just walked out of there with only their underwear on was absolutely amazing. And also, that little bonus that OP got in their paycheck was probably a mix of compensation for the time they stayed to work, and maybe a bit more, just to say, please don't sue us for that idiot manager forcing you to work off the clock. So, this is a long story, so buckle in. One of my first jobs out of college was working for this small company that provides financial services. Now, the place had a ton of problems, and most of them were because of the owner. I'll call her Cruella de Vil because she was tall, creepily thin, with a pointed face, and she was always wearing high heels and designer clothes. The woman was wildly incompetent, and she would regularly yell at people and blame them for her own mistakes. She frequently took long holidays abroad and talked about giving lavish gifts to her 20-year-old boy toy, while also complaining how expensive it was to pay us. She paid minimum wage, and nobody ever got raises. She would also fire people willy-nilly for imaginary or perceived slights. And the worst part about her is she also played favorites with the staff. So a couple of her cronies could do whatever they wanted, and the rest of us were treated like indentured servants. Also, turnover was extremely high. She had created such a toxic atmosphere that the only person working there were either F-ups who couldn't get any other job, or poor people like me who were desperate for any job and would quit as soon as they found something else. Basically, the only reason why the place hadn't folded yet was that Cruella only showed up 1 or 2 days a week, and the rest of the time we trundled along without her interference. She was pretty much a cartoonish villain, and I really can't overstate how bad her personality was. I laugh at her now, but she used to scare the crap out of me whenever she starts yelling at me from the other end of the corridor. Anyway, the job itself was boring and menial, but there was a very important task that we did. When we received the physical copies of contracts from clients, we needed to scan the contracts, upload the scans to our internal database, then send the physical contracts to our parent company to get archived. Now, this was very important because if a contract was lost, the client could default on their payments and the company would lose money. A single lost contract could mean a loss of $5,000 to $10,000, and the parent company would treat it as a very serious incident, and they would possibly launch an investigation. Of course, the company was very dysfunctional, and we were always losing contracts left and right. We knew that some of the contracts were missing, but nobody dared mention it to Cruella, who was too stupid to notice. This couldn't go on forever. One Thursday morning, she yells at me to get in her office, and she demands I check all the contracts in the database to see if anything was missing. She was under fire from the parent company because they were suspicious of discrepancies. So now, she pretended like it was my job to check and I hadn't been doing it. And this was BS because this kind of check wasn't in my job description, as I was a lowly worker and nobody ever told me I was supposed to do it in the 2 months I'd been there. However, I wanted to be a good employee, so I told her I would do it at once. She then took a stack of printed sheets of paper from her desk and she gave it to me. She then said, "Here's the contract numbers for the past quarter. Look up every single one of them and write down the numbers of all the missing contracts." But there's no contracts missing, it's impossible. But you lots are all idiots, so maybe something is missing. And hurry up, I need them by today because I'm leaving for vacation tomorrow. I just look at the stack of papers in my hand. It was maybe 100 pages long, and each page was a long list of contract numbers, maybe several thousand contracts. I quickly calculated that it would take me 4 to 5 days to go through that entire list by hand. Certainly, it was impossible to finish in one day. Of course, when I tried to point this out to Cruella, she looked at me like I was an idiot, and she starts yelling at me saying, "You just type this number in the computer, then look at this information here. It doesn't take more than 10 seconds, so stop being lazy and get to work." Now, she seriously thought that if doing it once takes 10 seconds, then doing it 1,000 times can't possibly take more than 10 minutes. Like, how stupid of me to think the laws of mathematics applied to Cruella, who always knew best. At this point, I was fed up with her and her stupid requests, but I was still trying to do my best. I know, I was young and naive. It wasn't malicious compliance time yet, though. I just went back to my office and I tried to figure out a way to truly complete the task in one day. After I calmed down from all the yelling, it occurred to me that it was actually very simple. Cruella had told me to check the contracts one by one because that's the only thing she knew how to do. But I had access to a database and to Google. So after some trial and error, I found an online tutorial, and I managed to query the database and immediately see a list of all missing contracts. I didn't even have to worry about accidentally skipping a line or typing the wrong number, which for sure would have happened if I'd done it by hand. The entire thing took me less than 2 hours. In the end, there were a grand total of 22 missing contracts. And again, losing one would be bad. Losing 2 would be worse. Losing 22 was, I won't lie, I was kind of gloating at this tangible proof of how much Cruella had messed up. So I printed the list of 22 missing contracts, as Cruella doesn't do emails, and I walked over to her office. At first, she was gloating like, "I told you it wouldn't take long, you lazy moron." And that's when she saw the list and her face went red. Immediately, she starts yelling at me that it was absolutely impossible and that I had made a mistake, and then screamed at me to do it again. Of course, I didn't budge because even when I didn't believe in myself, I believed in solid data. And I had manually checked those 22 records and I was 100% certain those contracts were all missing. So she did what she always did, and she started full-blown yelling at me, saying I was useless and that I must have done something wrong. I just kept shaking my head and saying this was the correct data that I got with my query. I'm also pretty sure that she had no idea what a query was, so the only thing she understood was that I hadn't done what she asked, which was manually check the records, and instead I obtained a list of numbers through some dark computer sorcery. She then yelled at me that I had not been given the task to hack her database, and insinuated that my degree was fake. And I'm not even kidding. She then threw the sheet of paper at me and she told me that my task was to do it over, and properly this time. So cue the malicious compliance. I went back to my office and I took her original 100-page list of contract numbers. I hadn't needed it earlier because I figured I could just filter the records by date, but now I was forbidden from doing that. Very slowly, I type the first number. I then wait for the page to load and then check the contract. I check it very carefully because, after all, this is a very important task that she sent me to do. The contract's fine, so I take a pencil and I carefully tick a check mark next to the first number. One down, several thousand to go. At this point, Cruella was paying me to listen to podcasts while doing a task that was already completed, but with a slower and less efficient method. Now, I had other tasks that needed to be completed, otherwise it would stop production, but I dropped everything else because Cruella told me this was my only task. By lunchtime, I had finished maybe 3 or 4 pages. By early afternoon, Cruella starts wondering what's taking me so long, and she was getting complaints that my other regular tasks weren't getting done. She then came into my office and she accused me of doing absolutely nothing all day. That's when I point to my list that I was going through, and while she watched, I made a show of very slowly looking up a contract number and ticking it off the list. I could now see the gears turning in her head, and she was realizing that she set me an impossibly long task. She then asked about my list of 22 missing contracts. I said I understood it was full of mistakes, so I had to shred it, and I also deleted the files from the computer. She then started yelling that she was going to leave the country tonight and I was being way too slow. I just replied that I was being very careful because she told me off for my mistakes, so I wanted to make sure it wouldn't happen again. And then she had a brilliant idea. She said I was way too slow and stupid, so she would do the job herself. Of course, her idea of doing the job herself was to call every single employee into her office, one at a time, and then give them a couple of pages of contract numbers and tell them to check and write down all the missing contract numbers. She refused to admit that I had proven that a single person could not do that task in a day, so she figured she would get 30 people to do it. That would show me. She gave me the most menial task of running around, collecting bits and scraps of paper once everyone was done, so she could put it into her list. She thought that was some kind of punishment for me, but at this point, I didn't care. And I just found it funny how she had stopped the entire office for a full 4 hours. Every time I gave someone their list of numbers, I made sure to say in a very serious voice, make sure to be careful and take your time with this because Miss DeVille says it's very important to make no mistakes. And seriously, this was complete madness. She even had the receptionist doing this task, so calls were going unanswered and the front desk was a mess. By closing time, she had cobbled together her list of missing contract numbers. She then showed it to me triumphantly, saying there was only 19 contracts missing. Now, aside from the fact that she was trying to spin it like it was a victory because there were 3 fewer contracts missing than I said, her list was absolutely wrong. I had kept a copy of my own list, and later I checked it against Cruella's list out of morbid curiosity. She and the other employees had correctly identified 18 missing contracts. 4 missing contracts had been completely overlooked, and 1 contract that was on Cruella's list was not missing at all. This last part was really ridiculous because it meant that nobody double-checked the list. Otherwise, they would have found the contract in the database, and the error would have been evident. I didn't point this out to Cruella because I'd not been given the task of double-checking her work. At this point, I had a bit of a grin on my face because I figured the parent company would end up not only discovering how many contracts were lost, but also that she didn't know how to check. She was effed, but she was too stupid to realize it yet. Of course, she starts yelling at me for that, saying, "Why are you laughing? Do you think it's funny that you wasted everyone's time for so many hours when this was your job?" I respond, No, you were absolutely right, Miss DeVille. It was possible to check all the contracts by hand by tonight. Thank you for showing me. She then says, "Don't you think you're so clever? You know how many people want your job? I could replace you very easily." I just say, "Really? Did you have many applicants for this position?" She says, "Lots." I say, "And were they qualified?" She replies, "Yes, way more qualified than you. I can replace you in a heartbeat." I just say, "Wow, it sounds like you should have given one of them the job, not me." She then says, "Yes, I could call any one of them and they would be willing to start tomorrow." To which I respond, "Good idea. You should probably do that because I'm giving notice. My last day is next Wednesday." At that, she was completely speechless and left. I never saw her again. She was supposed to be in Ibiza from Friday to Sunday, but I heard she prolonged her holiday. I don't know if that was to avoid me or the people from the parent company inquiring about their missing contracts. My replacement arrived on Tuesday, but I never talked to him. I walked out on Wednesday, and it was like a weight had been lifted from my soul. And here's the kicker. I wanted my last paycheck and to forget about Cruella. But Cruella's deputy manager, Jasper, told me that I would have to go in and sign some legal documents, saying I wouldn't sue the company. Otherwise, they wouldn't give me my money. I told Jasper that I had no intention of suing, I just wanted what was owed, but he kept saying I had to sign. He said it was a legal requirement for my own protection, something all former employees were required to do, and I couldn't have money unless I signed. Eventually, I said okay, I'll come in, so I went and I brought a lawyer. Jasper made a glorious oh crap face while I sweetly explained that since he had been so insistent on the phone, I wanted to make sure that we're signing all necessary documents and that no mistakes are made. The lawyer basically took a look at all the BS they wanted me to sign and quoted a bunch of laws and said something to the effect of, "My client's contract is very clear and she doesn't have to sign anything. If she doesn't receive her paycheck by this date, we will sue you for breach of contract." That's right, unlike some people, I had not mislaid my contract. I got my money the very next day, and I never looked back. I later heard that Cruella's company went bust, and she had to be bailed out by her family. She destroyed her own company with her sheer stupidity. What an awesome malicious compliance that was, guys, and holy moly, reading this post, I can only imagine how awful it had to be to work for someone that freaking incompetent. And yeah, I can see how that company had such a high turnover, guys. Like, a useless boss, plus them screaming at employees all the time is probably the worst place to work at. And one thing I wish OP did was email the list of missing contracts to Cruella's boss the second she was out of town to expose her. But it wouldn't have mattered anyways, right? Because her company went bust. With that said, I just love stories where one employee single-handedly takes down a whole company. How freaking satisfying is that? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where OP gets some new neighbors and they cause such a ruckus. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.